Welcome to the Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Visit us online at taoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Now, the Modern Taoist.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Modern Taoist. My name is Kit Man, and today is a bonus episode for this week. We've got the robots and AI episode that just posted on Tuesday of this week, and I said, you know what, we've got so many questions that have come in for our Ask Me Anything episodes, where people just curious about Taoism and want to know, you know, more and more information. Everybody just wants more, which is great. That's actually my favorite part of this. The fact that people want more and more and more makes me very happy. So I'm going to pick out, 4 or 5, maybe 5 questions today, and we will answer your questions about Taoism. If you ever have any, by the way, you can go to taoananda.org. That's DAOANANDA.org, and fill out the little form there, or you can just do it like some people do, and they just ask through social media on the comments or through DMs or whatever you want to do. I do read all of them. I can't guarantee that I will answer all of them because some of them don't really spur a necessary answer on that I can usually just answer it straight online. But sometimes we had a couple this week that I answered online, and then I realized, you know what, these people deserve a much bigger answer and a longer answer and a more fleshed out answer. So I said, all right, well, let's do another AMA. Ask Me Anything. And that's what we're going to do today. So when we set out on this journey to do these podcasts, I wanted it to be more than just about my reflections or my voice in Taoism. I wanted it to be what it is beginning to become. As we're, 15, 16 episodes in now, it is beginning to become a living conversation. Because Taoism is not meant to be sealed away. It is a path that moves us, and it's not meant to be hidden in the mountains. It's not, and it's also not meant to be used as a money-making tool, right? It's why I love doing these Ask Me Anything episodes, because it's free wisdom for you. It's free knowledge. These questions remind me that Taoism isn't just an abstract philosophy. It is alive. It is constantly moving, and it is alive in the questions that people bring from their daily lives. And across the map, by the way. Today we have questions from Seattle, San Jose, Denver, and Nova Scotia. And they cover everything from finding guidance when you feel alone, to overwork, to saying no to your boss, which is not that easy for many people to do. And even a question about the Tao Te Ching itself, to another question that came to us from Instagram about balancing Wu Wei with effort. And even very real questions about how Taoism meets grief and loss. So these are not always lightweight questions. They're questions that dig right into the marrow of what it means to be a human being. And the timing feels right, too, for a lot of these questions, because we're right in the middle of that season shift. Autumn is about a month old, just a little over a month old as we record this. The mornings are darker, the air is much sharper, it's clearer, it's crisper. And for many people, this time of the year stirs up reflection, sometimes isolation, sometimes stress. So it's a perfect moment to pause and ask, how do Taoist ideas actually meet us here, now, in the real world? So the guiding thread for this particular episode is, what does it look like to live the Tao when life gives us challenges that don't all look alike? So let's just jump right in to our first question today. And it comes to us from Adam in Nova Scotia. Thanks so much, Adam, for sending in your question. And Adam says, what if you don't have access to a mentor? where can one find guidance when someone lives isolated like I do? That is a really, really strong question, and it touches on something very, very real. In Taoist tradition, teachers are incredibly important, but they're not the only way to learn. A good mentor can point out where we're blind, where we're rigid, where we're making things harder on ourselves than they need to be. But here's the truth. Taoism teaches that the Tao is always available, with or without another person guiding us. The way is the way. And when you feel isolated, the first impulse is to believe that you're missing out on something. Maybe you're missing out on something vital. And you kind of maybe feel like that you can't grow without another human being showing you where growth is possible, or what direction you need to turn to stay on the path. But Taoism reminds us that the Tao itself is the teacher, right? Look how the water moves. Look how the trees grow. Watch how the day fades into night without struggling. Okay, the day doesn't struggle against the night. It just moves aside and lets the night take over for 12 hours. These are living lessons. They're available to us every single day, and yet so many people want to pretend that these lessons or these experiences and these notices have nothing to do with us. They want to say, well, it's the sun and the moon. Of course, it's natural. It's just going to do its thing. Yeah, bingo. B-I-N-G-O, and bingo was his name-o. That's exactly right. We are nature. And so our flow doesn't require approval or credentials or permission. Our flow is our flow. And the lessons simply require us to notice. Additionally, isolation doesn't have to mean emptiness. It can mean space. Sometimes not having a mentor forces us to pay attention in ways that we wouldn't if someone else were constantly feeding us the answers. Brings me to another point too, and I'll get to that. I'll get back to this in a second, but I want to sideline here for a second. If you do find a teacher, make sure that what you're getting is guidance and not specifics. As I think I've said before, my teacher was phenomenal. And the number one thing that he believed and that he taught was that as teachers, we can't teach you anything. All we can do is enlighten, turn on the lights. Everything that you need, learning about Taoism is like being in a dark room. And I can tell you that there's a shelf over there, there's a book on the floor, don't trip over that. By the way, the rug is rolled up in the corner. Uh-oh, look out, there's a chair. I can tell you all of that stuff is there. But if the room is still dark, you're probably going to bang your toe on something. So you need somebody not to tell you where all the stuff is, but to turn on the light so that you can see it for yourself. See? Living lessons every single day. Now, back to Adam's question. If you're isolated, think of it like walking in a forest without a guide. At first, you might feel lost, but then you begin to kind of get your bearings. You notice small signs. The way the branch bends that shows you which way the wind has been coming. The moss that grows on the thickest side of the tree, that grows thickest on each side of the tree. the sound that comes from a stream in the distance. Guidance is there if you're isolated. It just may not be packaged in the form of a human being. But there's another way to learn lessons that we don't often think about. Sometimes, and this has been the case in my life many times, our teachers are the bad examples that we see around us. A harsh boss, a selfish friend, a rigid parent, even ourselves when we react poorly to something. All of these can serve as reminders of what not to do. That, too, is a form of guidance. The Tao doesn't promise that every lesson comes from wisdom. Sometimes the negative space shows us the shape of the positive. And it's up to us to recognize when that is happening. That doesn't mean you cut off from people completely, because we live in a world where connection can take many forms, with books and letters and this podcast, and these can all be forms of mentorship as well. I'm happy that you joined us. I'm happy if you view me as a teacher or a mentor. That's fantastic. I know they're not the same as having a living teacher show up and go for a walk with you or have a conversation on the phone, but they can serve as sparks and reminders and encouragement, and sometimes even a brief encounter, a conversation, a passing word. Sometimes even the briefest encounter can shape your path for many, many years. Taoism doesn't measure guidance by the hours you spend with a teacher. It measures by the depth of what you take in and how you then take those lessons and live it. So, Adam, the answer is yes, a teacher can help you. But if you don't have one, you're not cut off. Take walks, practice breathing, pay attention to cycles around you. The Tao is never silent. We just need to quiet ourselves down enough to hear it. And that's going to lead us to another question, and this one comes to us from Laura in Seattle. And Laura says, what does Taoism say about overwork? How do you say no to your boss? This is a modern question, but believe it or not, it's got very ancient roots. Taoism may have been born before a time of email and Zoom meetings, but the human struggle of doing too much is nothing new. The Tao Te Ching reminds us that overextension leads to collapse. In nature, nothing can stay stretched forever. Not a bowstring, not a storm, not the human spirit. You cannot put stretch or pressure on something forever because it eventually will break. The work itself is not the problem. Effort has a place. But when work becomes constant without rhythm or without rest, that's when it pulls us out of balance. In Taoist language, it's like trying to keep the yang burning without ever letting in that nice cool yin. And that's why saying no is not an act of rebellion against your boss. It's an act of alignment with life's natural order. Now, I get it. I know what you're saying right now. You're like, yeah. Well, you don't have a boss, buddy. You don't know what it's like to tell somebody no that can fire you. No feels dangerous, right? But most of us are wired to think that our worth is tied to our productivity. If we turn something down, we might lose favor. We might lose opportunities. We might even lose our job. Taoism doesn't deny those risks, but it asks you to see clearly. Is endless overwork sustainable? The answer is no. And what happens when you bend endlessly without release? You eventually break. Water yields, but it also shapes mountains. When water flows naturally, it carves valleys. When it's forced into a narrow channel, When it's dammed and pressured beyond its balance, it becomes destructive. Work is like that. When it flows, it can give you goals. It can give you energy. It can fuel things within you. When it's forced, it can tear you down. So in real world terms, though, I know I got to give you a straight answer here. I can't just talk in Taoist talk. I can't just give you, hey, be like water. Okay, well, that's nice, but the hell with you, buddy. What does that even mean? Well, okay, I get it. So how do you say no in real terms? Well, you don't shout, you don't slam the door, you don't get mad. Softness is the way to go. And sometimes saying no is about redirecting. If your boss piles on another project on your desk, you're entitled to say, I want to do this well for you. It means something that you asked me to do it. But that also means something else is going to have to be put on hold. So, which task would you like for me to set aside? What is the priority? I have 5 things to do. You just handed me a 6th. What is the priority? Do you need this today? Or do you need it in 3 weeks? Or can someone else do it? You're not refusing. You're then giving them the choice. If your manager asks you to stay late, you might respond with, I can do that tonight, but I won't be able to tomorrow. So if you need me to stay late or if there's extra things done, let me know so I can plan ahead so that I don't have to keep disappointing you or turning you down. You're signaling a boundary without slamming the door. But what if you're already stretched to the limit? What if they've been piling it and piling it and piling it? You need to say, I'm at capacity. If I take this on, I'm worried that the quality will suffer. And then you'll get mad at me, and then I might lose my job. Be honest. Being honest is not weakness. It's a strength. And don't think I'm coming at this from some Taoist sage place. I have been a boss most of my life. I've been in charge of hundreds of people. And I loved it when somebody was honest with me. The worst thing a boss wants is somebody that says they'll do something and then doesn't do it. Because when you're in a position of leadership, sometimes you forget that somebody has a lot on their plate and you just need something done. And the worst thing that can happen, and I'm telling you from the boss perspective, the worst thing that can happen is to not do it correctly or not do it at all. I would much rather someone say to me, hey, kid, I appreciate that you're asking me to do this and you trust me with this, but dog, I've got so much to do right now. Like, how important is this? And in the moment I may go, well, dang it, if it wasn't important, I wouldn't give it to you. But really, that's the answer I want. These responses are practical. You redirect the force instead of fighting it head on. You remain clear and steady and aligned. And let's not forget that overwork doesn't come from the boss, it comes from ourselves. Because most of us have that inner voice that says, do more, stay longer, push harder, answer 3 emails. It's after 7 o'clock at night. Go ahead and answer those. But Taoism wants you to whisper, enough is enough. You do not have to wring the sponge dry every single day. The Tao Te Ching says, he who knows that enough is enough will always have enough. That's not laziness. That's wisdom. That's self-preservation. So Laura, at the height of your question is this: saying no is not about defiance. It's about rhythm. It's about remembering that life breathes in and out. It's about remembering you are not meant to live in exhale forever. Soften, redirect, reclaim your own balance, because believe it or not, that's what your boss wants too. So that's going to lead us into our third question today, and it comes to us from Clint in San Jose. And I don't know if this is San Jose, California, or San Jose, Costa Rica, or any of the other 25 San Joses out there. But Clint wants to know, he says, I have been studying Taoism on my own, but I've never had anyone actually explain all the chapters. Can you explain chapter 76? Yeah, it's chapter 76 is probably one of the 2 or 3 most practical passages in the Tao Te Ching. And let me read it to you from the translation that I have. When alive, man is soft and yielding. When dead, he is hard and stiff. All things, the grass as well as the trees, are soft and pliable in life, dry and brittle in death. Stiffness is a companion of death. Flexibility is a companion of life. An army without flexibility never wins a battle. A tree that is unbending is easily broken. The hard and strong will fall. The soft and weak will overcome. It's a nice poem, right? And on the surface, it kind of seems pretty obvious, right? Clint, you probably even thought, well, okay, that just means I got to be bendy. But what it is a roadmap of resilience. Because life expresses itself through softness and pliability and adaptability, and death, on the other hand, is rigid and stubborn and dark. If you've ever seen a young sapling bend in the wind, you know what this means. It bends, it sways, but it survives and it grows. But an old tree that refuses to sway, one strong storm, crack. Like the one that fell on my house like 6 years ago. Oh, man. Taoism constantly pushes us to see strength without flexibility is an illusion. You think you're strong by standing firm against every challenge? Nope. It's that very rigidity that will cause you to break down. Softness is not weakness. Softness is life itself. So what does that look like in practice? Clint, let's bring it down to everyday terms. In our personal lives, we face storms, deadlines, family conflicts, financial stress, even loss and grief. If we try to approach all of these things with this rigidity of control, insisting that everything must go our way, we end up brittle. How many people have you met that they just get so worked up at every single negative thing that happens to them in their life because they're insisting that life has to go their way? And when life bends them, they're so rigid that they shatter. But if you soften, adjust, move with the storm, that's when you endure. That is when you do more than endure. That is when you grow. In the workplace, that worker that insists this is the only way, they eventually get left behind. The flexible worker, the one that's willing to learn, the one that's willing to shift and adapt, they're the ones that thrive. In relationships, the person that must always win eventually stands alone. The one who bends, who listens, and who adjusts, they're the ones that keep the bond of that relationship alive and strong. Softness is not passive. It's active survival. Back to water. Water looks weak, wears down rocks, not by force, but with persistence and flow. The Tao Te Ching says the soft and the weak will overcome. Water doesn't blast its way through the stone in a single burst. It carves slowly. So, Clint, your question comes from studying Taoism alone. I get it. Chapter 76 shows you that you don't need an interpreter to see the lesson. Life explains itself. Wherever you notice flexibility leading to survival and rigidity leading to collapse, you are now reading chapter 76 in real time. And that leads us perfectly to our next question. If softness is strength and flexibility is life, then how does that apply to Wu Wei? Wu Wei, you might know, if you've listened to this or if you've studied Taoism, is effortless action. Many people understand Wu Wei as never doing anything hard. But Maya, who asked the question on Instagram, says, how do we balance Wu Wei with the reality that sometimes life demands discipline, effort, and building new habits? Her question is, how do you balance Wu Wei with doing hard things, like building habits or dwelling in the Tao? Maya, this question gets right to the heart of a common misunderstanding about Taoism. Wu Wei is often translated as effortless action. People hear that and they think that it means we should never sweat, never strain, never work hard at anything. But that's not what Wu Wei means. Wu Wei is not the absence of effort. It's the absence of wasted effort. So think of it this way. When you're aligned with the Tao, your actions flow more naturally. Now, that doesn't mean they're always easy. It means they're not forced. So, building a habit, like a daily meditation, sticking with a Qigong practice, or even taking a walking meditation every morning, those things require consistency. And sometimes they don't feel effortless in the moment. You may wake up tired. You may have a headache. Your mind may resist. But the question isn't whether it feels easy. The question is whether it feels aligned. So when you're pushing against your own nature, that's not Wu Wei. But when you're training yourself into a rhythm that supports your nature, that is Wu Wei in action. That's the difference between forcing and guiding. Think of a farmer with his crops. The farmer doesn't force the crops to grow by pulling on the shoots. That kills them. The farmer has to plant the seeds, water, tend, harvest, and do all of that with a consistency that is sometimes difficult. That's effort, but it's aligned effort. That's Wu Wei. The effort is lined up with life. A simple real-world example would be playing the guitar. At first, when you first get a guitar, pressing down on the strings hurts your fingertips. Your hands might cramp. Nothing about playing the guitar. Believe me, I'm a guitar player. I remember what it was like at the beginning. Nothing about that feels effortless. But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, your hands figure out the chords, calluses form on your fingertips. That effort shifts from struggle to flow. That's Wu Wei, moving through the hard parts into the natural rhythm where the action doesn't fight you anymore. And you brought up dwelling in the Tao. And I don't know where if you're speaking to teachers or if you're reading certain books, but there is a thing out there among Taoism teachers about you've got to dwell in the Tao. You got to stay in the Tao. You got don't ever leave the Tao. You better not leave that Tao or Tao it. No. Reading the Tao Te Ching once might not transform you. Returning it to it daily, reflecting, practicing stillness. That repetition is like water carving the stone. Each drop feels small, but over time, that channel deepens. The Tao is not asking you to remain in the center of the Tao or you're screwed. It's asking you to avoid unnatural challenges, the kind that drain you, and resist life's flow. Wu Wei teaches us this: you can build habits without self-punishment. If you're berating yourself, you are not dwelling in the Tao. If you are lining yourself gently and consistently, you are practicing Wu Wei and dwelling in the Tao, even if it feels hard at first. So Maya, the answer is Wu Wei doesn't mean do nothing hard. It means don't waste yourself on actions that don't flow with who you are and what life is offering. Habits, discipline, practice, they can all be Wu Wei when they grow naturally out of your alignment. Dwelling in the Tao is, too many people think of it as a box that you have to remain in. And in reality, the Tao is a gigantic river of energy. And as long as you are flowing with that river and doing what comes naturally or what feels natural, then you are dwelling in the Tao. And that's going to lead us to our final question for today's Ask Me Anything. If Wu Wei helps us navigate challenges, what about moments that shake us to the core? Elena in Denver asks how Taoism can help us stay balanced after loss. She says specifically, what does Taoism say about grief and staying focused and balanced after a loss? And this is one of the hardest questions anybody can bring, because we're not just talking about theory here. This is a lived thing. Loss is part of every human life. And grief never shows up the same way twice. Very rarely shows up the same way in two different individuals. One person may deal with grief by breaking down in tears. One person may deal with it by detaching and leaving. One person may deal with it by laughing. Taoism doesn't dismiss grief, and it doesn't demand that we just get over it. Instead, Taoism offers a way to see grief as part of the great cycle of life, rather than as something broken that needs to be healed. The Tao Te Ching teaches us that everything, not some things, everything, rises and falls. Everything. Everything appears and eventually disappears. Everything. Some things take longer than others. Spring follows winter, night follows day. Beginnings are always paired with endings. That's the way it goes. However, we like to hang on to one side of that cycle, right? The warmth, the light, the presence of the people we love, and we resist that other side. The cold, the dark, death, loss. But that does not mean that that other side is not just as natural. Neither side is a mistake. That doesn't mean it feels easy. When someone we love is gone, that absence feels unbearable sometimes. Don't suppress that pain. Let it move through you. Because if you try to dam it up, back to the water again, right? Taoist teachers are always going to the water. Always talking about the water. But if you dam that up, it's only going to grow stronger. If you try to suppress the pain becomes you, and you become the pain. If you allow it to flow, to have its moment and eventually fade away, it will eventually find its way back into a gentler current. One of the core truths Taoism offers is this: impermanence is not cruelty. It is the nature of life itself. What makes something precious is that it doesn't last forever. If something lasted forever, you wouldn't care what happened to it. You would just assume that it's going to be there tomorrow when you wake up. When you don't know for sure, that makes the moment you have with that person, place, or thing very, very special. The Tao isn't asking us to stop grieving. It's asking us to see grief as part of love. You grieve deeply because you loved deeply. But the love didn't vanish. It just changed form. Let's get away from the water and let's go to the trees. When a tree loses its leaves in the autumn, it doesn't curse the sky or collapse in despair. It stands there, bare, through the winter, and waits for the warmth to return. The loss is real, but it's not the end of the tree's life. It's part of the cycle. Well, that's all well and good. But how do you stay balanced in the middle of grief? Taoism practices aren't about escaping, they're about allowing. We're going to start where we always start, with breath. When grief tightens your chest, breathing can soften. Simply notice your breath. Inhale and exhale. Letting it lengthen, giving the body a way to keep moving when your heart feels frozen. Breathe. There is a simple ritual that many Taoists turn to, and that is find your own. It's weird, but find your own ritual. Light a candle. Place a stone on a windowsill. Create a small space to honor that person that you've lost. Taoism teaches us that small gestures can hold deep meaning. It doesn't have to mean anything to anyone else. It can be 30 seconds you take out of your day to light a candle. Close your eyes and breathe. And turn to nature. Spend some time outside. Watch the water flow. Watch the clouds move. Watch the way the wind makes the trees sway. Nature's not going to erase your grief, but it does remind us that everything is part of nature. It reminds us that nothing is stuck forever. It reminds us that the person that we've lost has now become part of that energy, that flow that you notice when you're out in nature. They have moved from where you are to where they are. They're still there. They're just in a different form. Nature continues, and so do we. Elena, balance in grief doesn't mean never stumbling. It doesn't mean not crying. It doesn't mean not feeling. It means allowing yourself to bend, to sway, and return, over and over. Taoism doesn't say be unshakable. It tells you that the shaking, the crying, the bending, the broken heart, these are all parts of being alive. Balance is not a rigid stance. Balance is the ability to keep moving, even when you've been knocked off center. So to answer your question, what does Taoism say about grief? It says don't rush. Don't rush it. Don't rush to deny it. Don't judge yourself for it. Let it be part of the great turning of life. In time, the sharpness softens, the love remains, and the cycle continues. And that is how we're going to wrap up our Ask Me Anything episode today. What I love about these questions is they come from real lives, not theory. You guys are not asking me about abstractions. You're asking how Taoism can meet the pressures of work, the ache of loss, the confusion of practice when you're searching for guidance. That's where this tradition lives, not in temples, not in old books, but in the texture of daily life. If you sent me a question this time, thank you. And if you're listening and thinking, I wish I had asked mine, remember, you still can. I thought initially that we would do one of these a month. It turns out we're probably going to do one every couple of weeks because of the amount of questions that I have a feeling are going to start coming in. This podcast only works because of the conversation between us. If it was just me chattering in a room, it wouldn't work. Your questions are welcome. Whether they feel big or small, abstract or very, very deeply personal, each one is part of the way, part of the Tao. So as always, I'd like to leave you with something today. Step outside if you can. Find one thing around you that is soft and alive, which is not that easy to do in fall, in autumn, but it's out there. There's still a patch of grass. There's still a whisper in the wind. Even your own breath. Spend a moment with it and notice how it moves and how it continues. That's Taoism in its most immediate form. Not something you have to read or master, but something you can notice right now. And I want to thank you for walking this path with me. If this episode spoke to you in any way, hit follow. That one click means the show grows. Tell a friend, leave a review if you think you can. If you're enjoying this episode, I thank you for joining us on The Modern Taoist.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Visit us online at dawananda.com or find us on all the socials. Please like or subscribe on this platform, and thanks again.